Right now, you have dozens of apps, a streaming service with 10,000 things to watch, and a podcast for literally every topic that exists. And somehow you're still bored by 9 at night. So here's a question almost nobody asks. What did ancient humans do when they were bored? Not medieval humans, not the Romans, not even the Egyptians. We're going back further. 100,000 years. 200,000 years. Back before writing, before art, before music, before language as we know it. Just a person, sitting there, with absolutely nothing to do. The answer to what happened next changes everything you think you know about creativity, religion, and why your brain works the way it does. But first, did boredom even exist back then? Believe it or not, that's a real scientific debate. For decades, researchers assumed our earliest ancestors were too busy surviving to ever get bored. Hunting, foraging, building shelter, every waking hour spoken for. Then, in 1966, an anthropologist studied a group in the Kalahari Desert still living something close to the original human lifestyle, and the numbers broke every assumption. They worked about 15 to 20 hours a week. Not a day. A week. The rest of the time, they rested, they talked, they sat and did nothing at all. So the real question isn't whether ancient humans got bored. It's what they did about it. They played. In a cave in South Africa, archaeologists found a collection of shells 75,000 years old, drilled with holes and coated in red pigment. Not tools, not weapons, not food, beads. Someone sat down 75,000 years ago with nothing better to do and made themselves jewelry. That's the oldest known art object in human history, and it started with boredom. Drilling through a shell with a stone tool would have taken hours, maybe days, with zero entertainment to pass the time. They did it anyway, because the only other option was staring at a cave wall. Necessity didn't invent art. Boredom did. The same pattern shows up in music. In a cave in southern Germany, researchers found a flute carved from a vulture bone, 5 finger holes, 40,000 years old. Before agriculture, before cities, before any civilization we'd recognize, someone sat down with a bird bone and a free afternoon and invented music. One neuroscientist argues musical ability is actually older than language itself, that our brains were wired for rhythm before we could form a sentence, because rhythm is pattern recognition, and pattern recognition kept our ancestors alive. But boredom didn't just invent art and music. It invented something bigger, imagination. Here's the strange part. You cannot be bored without a concept of time. To be bored, you have to know this moment is dragging, that something else could be happening, that the future exists, and it might be better than right now. Boredom is, in a very real sense, proof that a brain has learned to imagine things that don't exist yet. A dog waiting by the door isn't bored. It's just waiting. It has no idea what else it could be doing. A human sitting by a fire 100,000 years ago starts asking, what if the hunt goes wrong tomorrow? What's past that mountain? Where do we go when we die? Every question religion has ever asked. Every question philosophy has ever asked. Every question science is still trying to answer. All of it started the exact same way. Someone was bored, and their mind started wandering. In 2013, a psychologist ran an experiment. She had people do the single most boring task imaginable, copying numbers from a phone book, then tested their creativity right after. The bored group crushed everyone else. Because boredom forces the brain to generate its own stimulation, and left alone in a quiet room, the brain turns out to be extraordinary. But there's one more thing ancient humans did when bored, and it's the one that mattered most. They talked. Not about hunting, not about food. They gossiped. One anthropologist, famous for discovering that human social groups naturally cap out around 150 people, found that roughly 65% of all human conversation is just social gossip. Who did what? Who said what? What happened to someone you both know? Sounds like a waste of time. It wasn't. Before language, our ancestors bonded through physical grooming, one friend at a time. Language replaced that. Suddenly you could bond with 3 people at once, 10, an entire group around a fire. You could tell a story about someone who wasn't even there. Build trust with people you'd never touched. Civilization didn't emerge because we needed to coordinate hunts. It emerged because we were sitting around with nothing to do, and we started talking about each other. Boredom invented gossip, and gossip invented society. So here's where it lands. 75,000 years ago, someone bored in a cave made a bead. 40,000 years ago, someone bored in a different cave made a flute. And somewhere in between, People sitting around fires with nothing to do started asking questions nobody had answers to. About death, about the sky, about why anything is the way it is. Some of those questions became religion. Some became science. Some became art. Some of them became you, lying awake at 2 in the morning with your phone glowing on your chest, thinking about nothing in particular. Here's the part nobody talks about. Modern psychology has a term for what happens when you eliminate boredom completely: cognitive overload. When every single moment is stimulated, the brain never gets the quiet space to do what it was actually built to do: process, consolidate, create. The part of your brain that lights up when you're doing nothing is the exact same network responsible for creativity, self-reflection, and empathy. It only switches on when you're bored. We spent 300,000 years learning to fill silence with something meaningful, and then we invented the smartphone, and we've been filling silence with noise ever since. But every time you put the phone down and just sit with nothing for a moment, every time you let your mind wander instead of reaching for a screen, you're doing the exact same thing that person in the cave was doing. The same thing that made the bead, the same thing that made the flute, the same thing that looked up at the stars and started asking why. Boredom didn't hold ancient humans back. It's what made them human. And it might do the same for you if you let it.